Welcome to session 6. In this session, we will be talking about the covenant. In Exodus 19, we hear these words. On the first day of the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered into the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell to the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be a treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." These words are the beginning of what is to be the covenant. That is, the terms of the relationship between God and the Israelites. They had already been rescued and delivered from Egypt. They had already passed through the Red Sea. They have now come to the mountain of Sinai. They have been there for 3 months, and then God descends on this mountain, and He's going to begin to establish a covenant. In so doing, the people are now going to have a sense of who God is. For in reality, they probably knew very little about what kind of God He was, who He was. But in terms of this covenant, they will understand who God is, why He delivered them, what kind of mission they are going to be on, and how they are to live in the context of the rest of the world. And this is going to primarily be in terms of they're going to be a kingdom of priests, that is God's intent, to the rest of the world. And they are going to be a holy nation among all of the other nations in the world. So, God descends. There's fire, there's smoke, there's thunder, there's lightning, there is the sound of trumpet blasts, the mountain is shaking. And God speaks to the people, and He, at this point, basically reveals to them the 10 words. We often call them the 10 Commandments, but they are the 10 words of God. And the experience seems to be so overwhelming for the people themselves, and perhaps a sense of dread, that they actually request that God speak to Moses, and that Moses then come and speak to the people on his behalf. So after God delivers or proclaims these 10 words at Mount Sinai, He then gives Moses a number of instructions about how this is to be applied, how this is to be lived out, what these 10 words or what these 10 commandments look like in a number of relational type situations, including family and society and so forth, and God. And Moses goes back to the people, and he shares all of this with them. They've heard the 10 words. They now hear the reading from the Book of the Covenant. And the people proclaim, or people respond by saying that they will do everything that God has asked them to do. So Moses sacrifices some bulls, and he takes the blood of the sacrificial bulls, and he sprinkles them on the people, and then he goes back to the mountain. On the 7th day, he actually enters into the cloud of the mountain, where he spends 40 days and 40 nights. While he is there, God gives further specific and fairly detailed instruction about the tabernacle, a place where God and people will meet again. This meeting place that had kind of been lost since the days of Eden. Now there's going to be a place where they can come together and meet. And he also gives Moses instructions concerning the observance of the Sabbath. When all of that is done at the conclusion of the 40 days, God then gives to Moses 2 stone tablets which are inscribed with the 10 words or the 10 commandments of God. Moses and his assistant are going to make their way back down the mountain, and as they begin to make that journey back to the people, they begin to hear the sounds of the people, the loudness of what it is going, whatever is going on down there, and they begin to realize that these people, it's not a war cry, that something is going on. As they come closer, they begin to realize, they have the dawning realization as they hear the music, they actually now have seen a golden calf and see the dancing of the people. In the meantime, the time in which Moses had been away from the people, after that period of 40 days, they had begun to have concerns about Moses and wondered if perhaps he had died while he was with God, or maybe he wandered off the other side of the mountain. But they desired to have a new God, or to have a God that would now lead them forward, gods like they were very used to when they were in Egypt. So they have approached Aaron and said, we need to have a God. We're used to having a God. And Aaron then instructed all of the people to bring to him all of their gold jewelry, which they did. He melted it down, and then from that gold jewelry, he fashioned a golden calf, just like they knew when they were in Egypt. And this golden calf was their new proclaimed God. And after the construction, or after the fashioning of the golden calf, Aaron told the people that on the very following day, they're going to make an offering to their God, and then there will be feasting, there will be eating and drinking, and merrymaking and revelry, and all kinds of things are going on. And Moses is walking right into this. So Moses, with the 2 stone tablets in his hands, realizes what in fact has happened, certainly after he's seen the golden calf. And when he gets to the foot of the mountain, he throws the 2 stone tablets down, breaking them against the rocks at the foot of the mountain. Moses obviously realizes that this is quite a breach of the covenant, that the very people who had just proclaimed not all that long before that they would do everything that God had said, had already made their own God, decided their own path. And so Moses goes to God, and he knows that God has a burning anger about this situation. And in an incredible intervention or intercession, Moses says to God, if you wipe out all of these people, I would that you wipe out my name from your book. So God preserves the people, and nevertheless, he sends a plague to them. Moses himself takes the golden calf, he burns it, and he takes the ashes of all of that, he puts it into the water, and then instructs the people to drink from it as an ever reminder of the bitterness of what they had done and the idol that they had created, the sacrifices they have made. And so God then meets with Moses in a tent of meeting from time to time, and the people would stand outside their tents when that was happening, and they would be able to see that God was present by the cloud that they saw, and Moses would speak to God as a friend. And so Moses is speaking with the people, and he's speaking with God. God instructs Moses to go back up the mountain. Moses now has a desire to see the glory of God, and God honors that request and places Moses deep between two huge rock. And as God approaches him, he covers Moses with his hand. And as God is moving away from Moses, Moses is allowed, in a sense, to see the back of God and thereby see God's glory. So Moses has this incredible experience with God. He then now is instructed by God to take two stones and to inscribe the words of the law, the words of the commandment on those stones, and Moses will take those stones back to Israel, back to the nation. So when all of that is concluded, Moses now is gathered back to his people, and they have been at Mount Sinai for 2 years, and it is time for the people to be moving forward. And during Moses' return, or right after Moses' return, the tabernacle, the meeting place, is constructed, and the glory of God re-enters that place again, just as a reminder that for many, many years the Hebrew people have been without God living in their midst. And it is as the God who kind of left them, or the God that was not there after they were cast out of Eden, as far as living in the midst of the people, has returned to his people and is now living among them. As they're going to travel, God is going to provide for them manna each day, and yet as days go on, the people remember the food that they had in Egypt, and they grumble and they are restless, and in response to all of that, God now will also provide quail, some meat for them to eat. And then God is going to instruct that 12 spies be sent into the land of promise. And they will be there for 40 days and 40 nights. And while they are there, they will just kind of size up the place, come back and give a report to the Israelites. So the 12 spies set out, and they see, in fact, just how beautiful this land is. It is everything that God had said it would be. The soil is fertile. It produces great fruit and crops. However, they bump into some very sizable cities and some very large people who live in those cities. And that creates a fear in them that it would not be possible for the Hebrews or for the Israelite nation to go into Canaan and to be able to take this land. So the 12 spies come back, and they give their report of all that they've seen. They even bring some produce with them. And among those 12 spies, 10 of them describe it in terms of, it's just not something that's going to be possible for us to do. We're going to look like grasshoppers to these people, and we will be crushed if we go there. However, 2 of those spies, Joshua and Caleb, they say and remind the people that God is going to be with them, and that this is the land of promise, and that they are to proceed forward. So the people have now heard the report of these 12 spies, and they side with the majority report of the 10. And so God punishes the people 1 year for every day that the spies were in this land of promise. So for the next 40 years, the people of Israel wander about in the wilderness, in the desert. Obviously, a number of stories happen while they are there. And that generation, the original generation, is going to die out, and a new generation is going to come. During that entire time, Moses is still the leader of this people, and after the old generation dies out, the new generation is of age, the people are gathered, And Moses is going to speak to this new generation, and he's going to, in a sense, rehearse with them the terms of the covenant, the stories, go over with them, reminding them of what God had done, and things that God had revealed to the first generation, who He was and why He had done what He had done, and how this generation now is going to be able to serve in the world, and they now are going to be indeed a kingdom of priests and a holy nation among nations. And so Moses, in a lengthy address, or a number of addresses perhaps, shares with the people how they are to proceed forward. Moses, however, himself will never be able to see that, or never able to actually get into that land. He will see it. After the address to the people, this new generation, Moses goes up on Mount Nebo, where he spends his final days, and it actually turns out to be one of the most moving stories of the end of this incredible story of Moses. He's 120 years. So, from the end of the book of Deuteronomy, listen along to these words. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, from Naphtali to the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. God buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. So the great story of Moses and the redemptive act of God in leading the people out of Egypt, and in today's session, the covenant, the terms of that covenant, how that covenant was honored and not honored, how God returned to live with His people, how an entire generation was lost, how a new generation that emerged is now prepared and poised to go into this land of promise. That story has now come. Moses is complete. He has served. He's had an incredible 120 years, and God Himself has now taken him and buried him. Can you imagine, in a place where no one to this very day knows where he has been buried? May God bless you as you explore the covenant and the relationship, and maybe walk around a little bit in the wilderness itself and see how God is living among us, how He still tabernacles among us, and what that looks like in our world and in our culture.